Here's a little bonus that won't be in my upcoming updated setup tour video. My older 2017 OLED TV now serves as a dining room TV where I watch YouTube while eating my fresh, never frozen meals from Factor, our sponsor for this video. Typically, I'll see what's new that I want to watch, get it going, listen to the preamble as I choose my meal and put it in the microwave, and then when it's ready, I barely have to look away but for a few moments to get it on my plate and settle in for the rest of the video. Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code MLiG50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code MLiG50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. And now we're ready to see what kinds of cowboys, zombies, and other bad dudes Coury is up against on PS3.
Moving into the HD era opened up a whole lot of options for video games. High resolutions, bigger worlds, fuller sound, new game types, and so on. As we've well learned in the last 20 years, stronger tech doesn't always add up to more fun or easier to use. One genre of video game that tried to straddle the proverbial mechanical bull that is display technology for as long as it could is one of the earliest, the light gun shooter. These have been around for as long as I've been playing games, from the NES Zapper and Master System Light Phaser to the Super Scope, Menacer, and Justifier, and of course, Namco's various GunCons. All of these utilize the technology of CRT televisions to function, so once consoles moved into the HD realm, the downward slide quickly took hold. It sure didn't take long for things to turn dire, though, with the Nintendo Wii and PlayStation 3 only being able to stave off total abandonment outside of arcades thanks to the Wii Remote and the PlayStation 3 Move motion controllers. I've spent plenty of time over the years playing light gun or light gun adjacent games on the Nintendo Wii, but I've ignored most of the PlayStation 3 Move games for some reason. So in this episode, I've decided that it's time to remedy that. By using various suggestion lists from across the internet, I've rounded up as many light gun type PS3 games as I could get my hands on. Whether it's via disc release or PlayStation Network downloads. Some of these I already had, while others I am going in completely blind. Let's see which ones can recapture that tactile rush that can only be achieved by pointing a plastic toy gun at a TV screen. The transition period from gaming on CRTs to HDTVs is a curious one for light gun games. We had developers trying to figure out how to make the whole experience as seamless as it was in the decades before. Now, arcade games, they already had this figured out due to the custom-built nature of arcade cabinets. Bringing that home was notably more messy, as demonstrated by Namco's GunCon 3. They'd gotten things so streamlined with the GunCon 2 that suddenly having to untangle all this garbage and then set it up for one game took a lot of effort, even if that one game was Time Crisis 4. Outside of the annoyance that is actually setting it up, the GunCon 3 and Time Crisis 4 works really well. The arcade mode's gameplay is fast and furious, ducking in and out of cover and having multiple weapons to switch between. It all just feels right, even if it does have the most obnoxious character designs in the series. The free-roaming levels added to the PlayStation 3 version do their best to justify the additional buttons and dual analog sticks on the over-designed GunCon 3, but these are incredibly drawn out and, if you ask me, bring down the entire experience.
Appears to be the leader is escaping to the roof. Catch the leader. What in the world is it?
The tech used for the GunCon 3 is pretty similar to what's found in the Nintendo Wii Remote, although it might be a touch more accurate thanks to having two separate IR sensors with 3 LEDs each. It may have been more inconvenient to set up, but in hindsight, there's something to be said about using a bespoke light gun versus a device that had to be adapted to work with these types of games. The GunCon 3, as overdesigned as it is, felt perfect for Time Crisis 4 because it could be held in different ways that felt appropriate for the different types of weapons you'll be using. Alas, Time Crisis 4 was the only game to make use of the GunCon 3, which in turn ensured that most people who had one probably packed up all that stuff and put it away when they eventually got bored with it. Several years passed until Sony announced and subsequently released their Move controllers in 2010. These wands had a giant soft LED ball on the end, capable of changing to a variety of colors, along with 4 face buttons, a trigger, and a special Move button. The PlayStation Eye camera tracks the glowing bubble with the help of an accelerometer and inertial sensors, while a separate navigation controller has an analog stick, some buttons, and another trigger that can be paired with the Move wand for additional controls. It was more advanced, but functionally the whole Move ecosystem was a near copy of the Wii remote and the nunchuck. Sony, being gloriously late to the whole motion controller scene, did have its upsides though. Most obvious is that developers could easily port their Wii exclusive titles to the PS3, which in theory could run them better thanks to the more powerful hardware. It also meant that we sure saw a whole lot less of the junk plastic adapters like tennis rackets and golf clubs that littered Five Below and Goodwills even to this day. Still, proper light gun shooters do need to feel the part, and Sony delivered with 2 options. The first being the awkwardly named PlayStation Move shooting attachment, which is a simple, no-frills handgun adapter for the Move wand. Take the cover off, pop in the controller, and close it up. Simple as it is, the buttons on the controller itself were then pretty awkward to access.
Right between the eyes!
The Sharpshooter, a machine gun-like attachment, could fit both the Move wand and the navigation controller, addressing most of the critiques of the shooting attachment. It's like Sony saw the chintzy Wii Zapper attachment and decided to see how far they could push it. The Move wand connects into the controller via a tiny extension port, so a number of button shortcuts on the gun work perfectly. But really, this thing is so stupidly over the top that it's awesome. It's got an extendable stock for precise aiming and a pump action-like reload mechanism. There's even a button on the bottom of the ammunition clip so that you can act like you're slapping in a new one to reload. The whole thing makes it feel like you're Val Kilmer in the movie Heat. As tends to be the case anytime a new peripheral is released, a full-price tech demo launches alongside it to show off its capabilities. In this case, the Shoot was Sony's attempt at a gallery shooter that scratches that particular itch if you've been wanting something that feels like an early light gun game. It's likely that the Shoot was not on many's must-buy list when the Move shipped in 2010, but considering the gun game possibilities of the peripheral, Sony needed something to fill that gap. Developed by Cohort Studios, responsible for lots of puzzle games and trivia games on the PS2 and 3 and PSP, there wasn't much of a pedigree to help get people excited. Considering the wealth of sealed copies available on eBay for fairly cheap, it's safe to say that the Shoot remains pretty much unknown today. The player is cast in the role of an actor or stuntman that moves through various movie sets. Starting out in the Old West, you'll move into fighting robots and mobsters and more. The director yells out embarrassingly late 2000s catchphrases of encouragement while you blast through cutouts and animatronics held up by movie magic, aka strings and 2x4s. Earn enough points across 4 scenarios and you'll unlock the next movie.
That's okay, don't worry. This is the dawning of awesome!
At its core, the Shoot is a modern equivalent to something like Shooting Gallery on the Master System or Hogan's Alley, except a little bit more annoying since it expects you to pull off fancy motions to activate special powers. For instance, Showtime, which slows down time, requires you to do a spin in place. Yes, a full spin where you stand. This is bad enough with a shooting attachment, but don't try this with a Sharpshooter unless you want to make a mess. I've already talked a bit about Time Crisis 4, so let's take another look at Time Crisis Razing Storm, which collects 3 games onto 1 disc.
Time Crisis Razing Storm.
The second spin-off entry in the Time Crisis series, Razing Storm, takes what was good about the first spin-off, Crisis Zone, and cranks the dial up to nonsense. Instead of a handgun being your primary death-dealing tool, you've got futuristic heavy machine gun firing what feels like thousands of bullets a second. You'll mainly take cover behind a riot shield to reload instead of environmental obstacles. Oh, and you're going to be fighting some giant mechs. It's a little bit different from previous Time Crisis games, where you can actually see your gun on screen for the first time in the series. But it doesn't lose that classic hectic shooting action. Destructible environments fall to pieces in ways that the PS2 probably couldn't have handled. But it's unfortunate that everything about this game screams 2010. Not only the brown and gray color palette, but also the character designs and the dialogue and banter between them. Including Time Crisis 4, arcade version on the disc provides a nice contrast to Razing Storm, making it feel downright glacially paced when played immediately afterwards. As its namesake suggests, this is only the arcade experience, without the free-roaming levels of the standalone GunCon 3 release. Some might feel sad about the lack of this content, but it's much more cohesive and satisfying without it. The real treasure of this package?
Dead Storm Pirates.
Which is the perfect encapsulation of the type of amusement shooters that largely proliferate arcade spaces today. Armed with your golden guns, you'll fight off skeletons, giant snakes, and more while taking breaks to steer your ship. It's super fun, and the voice acting delivery is ultra silly, to the point that if it wasn't over 15 years old, I'd almost feel like it was created by an AI. Being Namco, of course, all 3 games in this collection do support the GunCon 3, but for the ideal, more arcade-accurate feel, at least play Razing Storm with the move and Sharpshooter.
Repairs completed! Great job!
I heard this can take us to where the ceiling monster lives.
I feel it in my bones.
Hang on tight!
I'd say that the easiest and smartest thing a developer could do at this point to support the move is to bring some of their more high-profile Wii games to the PlayStation 3 with a new HD coat of paint. Since Nintendo chose not to compete with the PS3 and Xbox 360 directly with either typical control methods or raw hardware horsepower, fans were left wanting when it came to the graphically intense releases on both of those platforms. Resident Evil 5 and 6 arrived on the HD consoles, so Capcom gave Wii players the duology of the Umbrella Chronicles and the Dark Side Chronicles in 2007 and 2009 respectively. Both came to the PS3 with move support in 2012. Umbrella Chronicles focuses on the STARS team members by cataloging the events of Resident Evil 0, Remake, and Resident Evil 3. Darkside pivots to Leon S. Kennedy and Claire Redfield to address Resident Evil 2 and Code Veronica, while also filling in the gap between Resident Evil 2 and 4 by letting you see what Leon and Jack Krauser got up to in the interim.
Something's wrong. It smells like a battlefield. Battlefield?
Dead Space had proven to be a mega hit on the PS3 and 360, so EA and Visceral Games threw the Wii players a bone with the prequel, Dead Space Extraction, in 2009. An HD digital version was put on the PlayStation Network for download, as well as being included as a bonus on the Dead Space 2 retail release in 2011. All 3 of these games play very similar in that they are mostly slow-moving first-person on-rail ordeals, with you mostly moving a crosshair around the screen and blasting everything that moves. These can be played with the shooting attachment and Sharpshooter, but here's where we run into a snag when it comes to playing games like this as a traditional light gun game. Likely because they're based on story-heavy third-person horror games, there's a much more deliberate pace to each level, some lasting upwards of 15 minutes.
Baines and Hutchins, 2 of my best.
Detected.
A pleasure.
And Calkins here is my rookie.
It's an honor, sir. Sergeant Weller speaks highly of you.
There's also way too many controls that you have to worry about, and sometimes QTEs that require different button combinations each time. Some enemies require extremely precise aiming to take down, whether it's shooting them in the head or in the mouth or slicing off limbs. So even though they support the different gun attachments, it was just way too slow and exhausting to enjoy playing in this way. Not fun at all. So ultimately, I resigned myself to playing them in the traditional Wii game manner, which means sitting in my chair holding the pointer wand in my right hand and the navigation controller in my left. And Wow, they are so much more playable like this. I'd say that all three offered superior experiences to the Wii originals under these circumstances.
It's locked.
We have to find another way. Behind you!
So what about GoldenEye Reloaded, you ask? Well, even though the remaster of the Wii release is a move and sharpshooter compatible game on the PlayStation 3, it's a more traditional first-person shooter where you should just play with the dual analog sticks instead of being hindered by the sharpshooter. Sorry, but I'd never do that, so I didn't feel like that was an appropriate game for this episode. And yes, that's also the reason I'm not covering Killzone 3 and Resistance 3 here. There was a time when we thought that full motion video was the way of the future. While it didn't quite catch on the way that some industry folks thought it would, it was interesting to see developers apply the tech to different genres. For developer Digital Leisure, it was an easy win to bring some of those arcade FMV games to PSN with move support.
Howdy, stranger. We need your help. Mad Dog McCree's gang is taking over the town.
The first and therefore most iconic FMV light gun game is Mad Dog McCree, developed by American Laser Games that came out in 1990. But I've never even seen a real arcade cabinet of this in my life. The setup is simple. Survive several shootouts and fast draws around town to take down the outlaw Mad Dog McCree. The sequel, Mad Dog 2: The Lost Gold, followed in 1992 and is a considerable improvement on not only the film budget and acting side, but there's a much wider variety of encounters to experience too.
I got a short fuse too, stranger.
Although the games are in quote-unquote HD on the PlayStation 3, the video quality, particularly in the first game, isn't all that great. Digital Leisure, who now owns all of American Laser Games titles and handled this version, seems to subscribe to the crank up the contrast because that'll make these look more HD ethos. Although both games have been ported all over the place, including even DVDs, this was actually my first experience with either game. I appreciated what they were going for, and playing with the shooting attachment felt natural. While playing Mad Dog, I started having thoughts about how playing games like this don't quite feel the same on an HD TV as a CRT. It's very hard to articulate, and I'll be curious if any viewers of this episode feel the same way. I don't know if it's due to the bigger screen tech, or most games utilizing a crosshair on screen, or maybe it's the white flash that occurs on a CRT when you shoot that gives it more of an impact. This isn't always a problem, but it's something I've been thinking about.
Number 5! Nice shot.
Another Digital Leisure game, Fast Draw Showdown, definitely doesn't suffer from this. Streamlining the Mad Dog formula down to simple duels with a variety of colorful characters makes for a really fun time, even if it is pretty shallow. Point your gun downwards like it's in a holster and then draw and shoot it when it tells you to. It's clear to me that everyone involved was having a heck of a lot of fun making this.
One body to go.
Oh, and based on what I was saying earlier, turn off the crosshair here. It makes it feel way more intense and unpredictable. So if you're gonna get one of Digital Leisure's games on PSN, this is an easy choice.
You're faster than I thought you was. You ought to keep playing.
Look, I'm willing to bet if you've come across a light gun game out in the world today, it was a deer hunting game. Thousands of Big Buck Hunter and Cabela's machines litter movie theaters and bars to this day. You might feel the urge to turn your nose up and call these stupid or bad, but let's not fool ourselves. These are little more than a half step from Duck Hunt and Safari Hunt. Still, I never thought that I'd ever be talking about Cabela's Big Game Hunter 2012 in an episode, but here we are. You probably have an idea of what this is like, a slow, methodical hunting experience, but I wasn't expecting an over-the-top story mode that follows your character trying to get in with an exclusive group of big game hunters.
Believe it or not, I'm on vacation right now. I guess you could say this is my idea of getting in touch with nature.
I clearly didn't see this through to the end, but if it doesn't culminate with you being hunted by the hunters and then turning the tables to become the hunter, then it sounds like a real missed opportunity. The real draw here is the shooting gallery modes, where you fly through an area and rack up animal kills. It's actually kind of hilarious how you fly around. I like to imagine that you're on a lawn chair with hover jets or something. You have a shotgun for shooting geese and rabbits, and a rifle for the big game: deer, bear, mountain lions, and so on. Shoot an animal with the wrong gun, and the game will scold you. You know, don't make me switch between guns so often. And besides, chill out. A kill's a kill, right? I guess it shows you how much I know about hunting. The other Cabela's game I decided to check out was 2011's Cabela's Survival, Shadow of Katmai. Sounds intimidating, right? In this case, my lack of research worked in my favor but this sure as heck isn't what I was expecting.
Thank God you're okay.
I lost it. It has to be here, somewhere.
Dr. West, are you all right?
Well, it sort of is, I guess. There's a ton of different shooting gallery modes, but this time, everything's trying to kill you.
It's gonna charge! Bullseye!
The main game, though, check this out. It's an Uncharted clone. I didn't see that coming, and that's actually pretty cool outside of running like garbage a lot of times. It's mostly third person, with the navigation stick moving your characters around while you aim with the wand. You'll climb up mountains, fight off wolves, land a crashing plane, and drive a dog sled in the first 20 minutes alone. This is actually pretty neat, and I appreciate the ambition.
Run, go!
A while back when I was talking about ports of Wii games, I'm sure a bunch of you were ready to call me out on forgetting about House of the Dead Overkill. Maybe some of you have already left a comment about it. Well, that was intentional, because I wanted to talk about the trio of House of the Dead titles that are Move compatible. After House of the Dead 2 and 3 hit on the Wii, Sega moved forward with House of the Dead Overkill, the first new entry in the series in 4 years. This spin-off prequel mixes things up with a spirited grindhouse aesthetic, which fits the series well. But the thing you're going to hear most people talk about is the number of F-bombs flying at you at every second. I think this may have held a record or something like that for the number of swear words in a game at the time. And it was on the Wii. As destiny would have it, House of the Dead Overkill Extended Cut hit the PS3 in 2011 with additional levels and a visual overhaul. As much fun as the Wii version was, this was the complete experience for fans. Revisiting this game for this video, since I only ever played it on the Wii, I was prepared for it to have not aged that well. But, yeah, it's still pretty funny.
You ever gonna tell anyone what that G stands for? No.
This is definitely a console-centric experience. The levels are more drawn out, the bosses die a little bit slower, weapon stats can be powered up, and a number of hidden items and unlockables await in each level.
I see the service here hasn't improved.
But as good as it is, Overkill is far from the best House of the Dead game on the PlayStation 3. Well, at least in my opinion, because House of the Dead 3 and 4 are available digitally on PSN.
Still alive?
Now we're talking. To say that both of these are satisfying with the Move Sharpshooter is an understatement. Using the pump action reload for House of the Dead 3, where the characters themselves use shotguns as their primary weapon, feels so right. House of the Dead 4 gives the characters submachine guns, which also is appropriate. Oh, and turn off those crosshairs, because this game feels completely amazing without them. Enemies just plow towards you at an unrelenting pace, so it's not like you gotta worry about precise aiming. Just mow them down.
You just don't give up, do ya?
The great thing about these is they are just pure arcade intensity. And you know what? I'm gonna say it. I think that these are the best games in this episode. They truly encapsulate what I was looking for when I started making this episode more than any other game featured. I guess the closest thing is probably the Time Crisis Razing Storm trio. I can't believe that House of the Dead 4 hasn't been ported anywhere else to date. If you have any interest in this, grab it from PSN on the PS3 as soon as possible, lest it gets delisted for some reason or another. And while you're at it, go ahead and grab House of the Dead 3 as well, because if you're going to get one, you might as well go all the way. These days, we know developer Teon as a team capable of reviving classic movie properties from the 80s and 90s in video game form with titles like Terminator Resistance and RoboCop Rogue City. These pay respectful tribute to the source material and ultimately deliver the sequels that probably should have been in the first place. Before that, their specialty was the on-rails first-person shooter series, Heavy Fire. Heavy Fire started life on the Nintendo Wii as a series of downloadable WiiWare titles, until it moved to the PlayStation 3 in 2011, with Heavy Fire Afghanistan and Heavy Fire Shattered Spear in 2013. Based on everything that we've seen in this episode, the best way to describe Heavy Fire is an on-rails cover shooter. It's sort of like a mashup of the Resident Evil Chronicles games and Time Crisis. So it'll work with the Sharpshooter, but I'm not completely sure if that's the optimal way to play it, you know? The cover aspect is certainly more nuanced than Time Crisis, with most scenarios offering 2 or 3 different options to hunker down behind. Except, just because you're in cover doesn't mean you're out of sight from all enemies. Some can still hit you, and you them, based on their relative proximity to the obstacles you're behind. While these are both decent looking games, the locales are about as dull as you'd expect for 2010. But I was dying at the voice acting though. There's just something hilarious about nonsensical military jargon being shouted out by bad voice acting.
Reporting at the hangars. Still high enemy activity. Over.
Alpha 1, secure the birds. Do you read me? Over.
Copy on that, C2. We're moving out.
The second game, Shattered Spear, takes a turn towards the more gratuitous, and each level feels more like an action movie set piece. The scenarios are also changed up a bit more here. Sometimes you'll be just in the thick of the battle, while others you'll be manning the guns on a flying fortress plane. It is definitely a more streamlined and enjoyable experience.
3-2, this is 3-1. We need support on the riverbanks. Too many tangos with heavy vehicles. Out.
Got that, 3-1.
The success of Heavy Fire segued into what Teon is known for today with Rambo, the video game. It's very much a Heavy Fire game with a Rambo skin, which isn't something that I consider to be bad. At least it means we'll get out of the desert environments for a little bit. The game is framed as Colonel Troutman talking at Rambo's funeral, recounting how much of a killing machine the guy was. But even though it was released in 2014, 6 years after the release of Rambo 4, Rambo the video game chooses to adapt only the first 3 movies in the campaign. Perhaps it was omitted because there's not a whole lot of action set pieces to draw from in that movie, but hey, they certainly had no problem developing original scenarios for the game, such as the intro level with him escaping from a concentration camp with his buddy that he goes looking for in First Blood.
There's no question. That experience broke something inside Rambo. But it was so far below the surface, no one saw it. Like tiny pieces of shrapnel floating around in its blood, cutting him up inside.
The action is broken up with QTEs, and like RE Chronicles, these are a pain in the butt to do when you're just using the Sharpshooter, mainly because it takes me a few milliseconds to remember what order the buttons are situated in on the move wand. Seeing there's a lack of quote-unquote traditional Rambo action in the first movie, several of the intro segments focusing on that film are exclusively QTEs. Before they just go ahead and take the shackles off and let Rambo start gunning down the police officers with little remorse. I guess to help justify it, you can take out their knees or shoot the guns out of their hands for bonus points. After gunning down enough enemies, Rambo can go into a berserk mode where time slows down and he's invincible and regains his health. Hearing Rambo scream when this happens cracked me up every time. I don't even know why I thought it was so funny. And to be completely honest, this is not an especially nice looking game. Stallone seems to have licensed his likeness to the game. I mean, I guess if you don't get that, you may as well not make a Rambo game, but everyone else doesn't look like their film counterpart. Rambo the video game is certainly more challenging to get a hold of these days. It's been delisted from PSN and other online stores, and the physical version hovers around $60. To add further insult, a DLC episode was released that is impossible to get now.
I could have killed them all. I could have killed you. Been telling you the law. Out here it's me. Don't push it.
So, those were the games that I came up with. I'm torn because there's some good stuff here, but none of these deliver the sort of high-intensity feedback as, say, Time Crisis 2 and 3 with the GunCon 2. It's weird. It's hard to convey it in words, but having a crosshair cursor just doesn't feel the same. The games that shine brightest are the ones that just accept the genre for what it is without overcomplicating it, and let you turn off the cursor. But I don't want to end on a down note, but one thing that I've realized in the last year is that, if anything, VR headsets have really picked up the slack and delivered some amazing light gun style gallery shooters that might just blow your mind. I'm talking about the sort of stuff that non-VR systems could ever hope to compete with, you know? Which makes you wonder. I wonder if Namco would ever do a Time Crisis 6 like that.
Game over.